Hey guys, tonight we begin with one of history's most beautiful lies. The romantic story of the Taj Mahal. You know the version. Grieving emperor builds stunning monument to his beloved wife, love conquers death, architectural poetry in marble, etc. What they don't tell you is that this monument to love was built on the broken backs of 20,000 workers who spent 22 years turning someone else's grief into their own living nightmare. Imagine this. It's 1632 in Mughal India, and you're just trying to survive another scorching day in your village when the imperial recruiters arrive. They're not asking if you want to help build the world's most famous tomb. They're telling you. See, when Emperor Shah Jahan decided to immortalize his dead wife Mumtaz Mahal, he didn't send out job applications. He sent out demands. You might be a stonecutter from Rajasthan, a brickmaker from Delhi, or just an unfortunate soul who happened to know which end of a chisel was sharp. Doesn't matter. The emperor needs bodies, and yours just got voluntold. The recruiters promise good wages, and by good, they mean better than starving, plus food and shelter. What they don't mention is that the shelter is a mud hut shared with 20 other men, and the food is whatever didn't rot on the journey from the imperial kitchens. Some workers came willingly, lured by promises of steady pay in a world where drought and famine were your annual house guests. Master craftsmen, the marble inlayers, the calligraphers, the designers, they actually had some bargaining power. They might even get separate quarters and meat once a week. But you're just muscle with a pulse. The journey to Agra alone could kill you. If you're coming from the quarries of Makrana, that's 200 miles of desert, dust, and dysentery. No air-conditioned buses, no rest stops with clean bathrooms. Just you, maybe a bullock cart if you're lucky, and the constant companion of every medieval traveler. The runs. You travel in groups for safety because bandits love targeting work crews. Nothing says easy money like exhausted laborers carrying their life savings in a cloth pouch. When you finally see Agra on the horizon, your first thought isn't, "Wow, what a magnificent city." It's, "Please let there be water that won't kill me." The Yamuna River runs alongside where the Taj will be built, but in 1632, it's less sacred waterway and more open sewer with delusions of grandeur. The recruitment process was especially brutal if you were a Hindu craftsman in a Muslim empire. Sure, the Mughals were relatively tolerant by 17th century standards, which is like saying a particular strain of plague was relatively pleasant. You'd still face extra scrutiny, random loyalty tests, and the constant reminder that your gods weren't the management's gods. But your skills were needed, so you'd bite your tongue, lower your eyes, and think about the money. And let's talk about that money for a second. The promised wages sounded good in theory. A skilled craftsman might earn 5 to 7 rupees a month, when a common laborer elsewhere might get 2. But here's the catch. Deductions. Food, shelter, tools, protection fees, mysterious administrative costs. By the time the overseers were done with creative accounting, you'd be lucky to send home enough to keep your family in grain. Some workers brought their families, turning the construction site into a sprawling shanty town. Others left wives and children behind, promising to return rich. Spoiler alert, many didn't return at all. The Taj Mahal isn't just built on marble foundations, it's built on thousands of be-back-soon promises that turned into permanent goodbyes. Congratulations, you've arrived at what will be your home for the next several years, or until you die, whichever comes first. The worker settlement sprawls around the construction site like a fungal infection. And, honestly, that's an insult to fungi. At least fungi serve a purpose. Your accommodations would make a modern refugee camp, look like a 5-star resort. The lucky ones get mud brick huts, 4 walls that might survive the monsoon if you sacrifice the right goat to the right god. These huts are approximately the size of a modern walk-in closet. Except instead of designer shoes, you're sharing it with 5 to 8 other men, their combined body odor, and whatever creatures decided to make their home in the thatch roof. The unlucky ones? You get a spot under a lean-to made of bamboo and whatever fabric you could scavenge. During the dry season, it's like sleeping in a tandoor oven. During monsoon, it's like sleeping in a waterfall. There's no winning, only different flavors of losing. Privacy is a concept that died the moment you arrived. You'll learn more about your hutmate's digestive systems than you ever wanted to know. That guy from Punjab? He snores like a water buffalo with bronchitis. The stonecutter from Rajasthan? He talks in his sleep, mostly about his wife, sometimes about vegetables. It's weird. You'll develop the ability to change clothes under a blanket while 3 other men are doing the same thing 2 feet away. It's like a really depressing magic show. Sanitation is, well, it isn't. The latrine situation makes you nostalgic for the roadside bushes you used on the journey here. Communal pits are dug at what someone optimistically deemed a safe distance from the living quarters. Spoiler, it's not far enough, especially when the wind changes, or when the monsoon floods everything and turns the entire settlement into a fecal soup. Cholera and dysentery run through the camp like they're training for a marathon. Water comes from wells that are definitely not deep enough to avoid contamination from said latrines. You'll learn to let the sediment settle, close your eyes, and pretend those floating bits are just mineral deposits. They're not. But pretending keeps you sane. Boiling water? Sure, if you can find fuel. But most of the nearby trees went into scaffolding or were burned for lime mortar. So you drink it raw and pray to whatever deity handles intestinal fortitude. The noise never stops. During the day, it's the constant chip, chip, chip of chisels on marble, the groaning of wooden cranes, the shouts of overseers, and the screams of whoever just got crushed by a falling block. At night, it's coughing, crying, praying, fighting, and the occasional death rattle. Sleep becomes a skill you develop out of pure exhaustion. Food distribution happens twice a day, and it's like Black Friday shopping, except everyone's fighting over stale bread instead of flat-screen TVs. The basic ration is supposed to be enough dal, rice, and bread to keep you functional. Functional being the operative word, not healthy, not satisfied, just capable of lifting heavy things without immediately dying. If you're Muslim, you might get better rations during religious festivals. If you're Hindu, you'll discover that your dietary restrictions are suddenly very flexible when the alternative is starvation. Vegetarianism becomes a luxury when the only protein available is whatever died in the general vicinity of the cooking pot. Personal hygiene. That's the best joke you've heard since arriving. You'll wash when it rains, or in the Yamuna if you're feeling particularly brave about waterborne diseases. Soap is for people who don't spend their days covered in marble dust and sweat. You'll develop a patina of grime that becomes part of your identity. Clean workers are new workers, and new workers are mocked mercilessly. Your possessions fit in a small bundle. A spare dhoti if you're lucky, a brass cup, maybe a charm or religious token, and the knife you eat with and sleep with, because trust is a luxury you can't afford. Theft is common, not because everyone's evil, but because everyone's desperate. You'll learn to sleep with your valuables, tied to your body and one eye open. This is your world now. A sun-baked, disease-ridden, overcrowded slice of hell where men grind themselves into dust to build an emperor's marble grief. Welcome home. The day starts before the sun has the decency to show up. Some overseer's assistant, drunk on the tiny amount of power his position gives him, walks through the camp banging a metal pot. It's 4 a.m., and your body protests with every joint as you unfold yourself from whatever pretzel position you slept in to fit in your allocated floor space. Breakfast is a generous term for what happens next. You shuffle to the food distribution area where they're ladling out a gruel that looks like someone already digested it once. It's supposedly made from lentils, but you suspect they just boiled whatever was swept off the ground yesterday. You get one ladle full in your brass cup. Maybe a piece of bread that could double as a weapon. The bread is a fascinating study in density, somehow both rock-hard and mysteriously damp. You dunk it in the gruel and pretend it's your mother's cooking. It's not. But the human mind is remarkably adaptable when the alternative is despair. By the time the sun peers over the horizon, you're already at your station. If you're a common laborer, that means the quarry pits where the marble is rough cut, or the transportation routes where you'll spend the next 12 hours as a human mule. If you're lucky enough to be a skilled craftsman, you're at least working in the shade of the growing structure. Lucky being relative, you're still breathing marble dust that's slowly turning your lungs into decorative stone. The marble comes from Makrana, 200 miles away. Each block weighs several tons and needs to be perfect. One crack, one flaw, and it's rejected. Do you know what happens to rejected marble? Nothing good for whoever was responsible for transporting it. The journey from quarry to site is a death march for both humans and animals. Oxen collapse from exhaustion, their bodies left to bloat in the heat. Workers die from heat stroke, accidents, or simply giving up. The marble doesn't care. It just needs to get to Agra. If you're on transport duty, you're part of a human chain that would make Amazon's warehouse workers weep with sympathy. Massive blocks are loaded onto wooden rollers, and you push and push and push for miles. In heat that makes hell look temperate. Every few yards, someone has to run to the front with the rear roller, place it under the block, run back, and push again. It's CrossFit designed by a sadist with an architecture degree. The wooden cranes and pulleys used to lift marble blocks are engineering marvels held together by rope, prayer, and the occasional human sacrifice. When a rope snaps, and they do with disturbing regularity, the block comes down like the fist of an angry god. Best case scenario, it just crushes some scaffolding. Usual scenario, it takes a few workers with it. The screaming stops pretty quickly. The work doesn't stop at all. Skilled craftsmen have their own special hell. You're doing work that would challenge modern artists, except you're doing it with hand tools and brutal heat while someone screams at you in a language you might not fully understand. The marble inlay work, the famous pietra dura, requires cutting tiny pieces of semi-precious stones and fitting them into marble with tolerances that would make a Swiss watchmaker nervous. One mistake, and you've ruined weeks of work. The punishment for ruining weeks of work? Let's just say it incentivizes precision. The calligraphers have it marginally better. Working under covered areas, painting Quranic verses that most of the Hindu workers can't read. The irony of illiterate workers building a monument covered in scholarly script isn't lost on anyone, but irony doesn't pay the bills. Water breaks are theoretical. Yes, there are water carriers who are supposed to bring clay pots around. In practice, they come when they feel like it. The water is warm enough to brew tea, and there's never enough. You learn to ration your sweat. Heat stroke is so common it has its own informal triage system. If you can still stand, you keep working. If you can't stand but can crawl, you get moved to shade. If you can't crawl, they check if you're still breathing. If yes, water. If no, replacement. Lunch happens whenever the overseers decide you look sufficiently near death. It's the same gruel as breakfast, but now it's been sitting in the heat for hours, developing a skin thick enough to use as leather. Sometimes there are vegetables floating in it. You hope they're vegetables. They're probably vegetables. You eat them anyway. The afternoon is when the heat reaches its full malevolent potential. The marble becomes untouchable. The tools burn your hands through the calluses, and the air shimmers with the collective suffering of thousands. This is when most accidents happen. Exhaustion makes you sloppy, and sloppy gets you dead. You'll see at least one serious injury a day. Someone's hand crushed between blocks. Someone falling from scaffolding. Someone simply collapsing and not getting back up. As the sun finally admits defeat and sinks toward the horizon, you get to make the trudge back to camp. You're covered in marble dust that makes you look like a ghost. Your muscles scream symphonies of pain, and you know tomorrow will be exactly the same. Dinner is, surprise, gruel again, though the evening batch sometimes has the luxury of actual lentils you can identify. You collapse onto your spot in the hut, too exhausted to even remove the day's grime. Tomorrow the pot banger will come again at 4 a.m., and you'll do it all over again. For years. Until the Taj is complete or you are. Whichever comes first. Let's talk about what working with marble for years does to the human body, shall we? Spoiler alert, nothing good. See, marble dust isn't just regular dust that makes you sneeze. It's basically tiny razors made of calcium carbonate that you're inhaling 8 to 12 hours a day. Your lungs are having about as much fun as a fish in a sandstorm. The condition has a fancy modern name, silicosis. But in 1632, they just called it the stonecutter's curse, or marble lung. It starts subtle, just a little cough, nothing serious. Everyone's coughing anyway between the dust and the various respiratory infections racing through the camp like they're competing for a medal. But this cough doesn't go away. It gets worse, deeper, wetter. Your breathing becomes a conscious effort. Remember that feeling when you were a kid and you'd see how long you could hold your breath underwater? Now imagine that feeling, but it's permanent, and you're not underwater. Your lungs are just slowly turning into stone from the inside out. Poetry, really, if poetry were written by someone who genuinely hated you. But marble dust is just the appetizer in this buffet of occupational hazards. Let's discuss the heat rash that turns your skin into a topographical map of misery. In the Indian summer, when temperatures hit 45 degrees Celsius, 113 degrees Fahrenheit for the Americans, your sweat doesn't evaporate, it just sits there, mixing with marble dust to create a paste that blocks your pores. The resulting rash makes you look like you've been attacked by invisible jellyfish. It itches, it burns, and scratching just makes it worse. But you'll scratch anyway, because what's a little bacterial infection between friends? Your hands tell their own tragic story. Even if you started with calluses thick enough to palm hot coals, the constant friction of tools and rope wears through them. Blisters form, burst, and reform in an endless cycle. The marble dust gets into every crack and cut, creating infections that turn your fingers into swollen sausages. Some workers lose fingers to infection. They're the lucky ones, at least it's quick. Others get blood poisoning that travels up the arm, turning black as it goes. Medieval amputation techniques are, let's just say, rustic, and leave it at that. Your back is conducting its own science experiment in how much abuse the human spine can take. Spoiler, not this much. You're constantly bent over, lifting blocks that would make a modern forklift operator reach for workers' comp forms. Herniated discs aren't diagnosed. They're just that pain that never goes away. Your vertebrae compress like an accordion played by someone who really hates music. By age 30, if you make it that far, you'll walk like you're 80. Eye problems? Oh, we've got those in bulk. The sun reflecting off white marble is like staring into a cosmic flashlight all day. Snow blindness, except it's marble blindness, and there's no snow day to recover. Your eyes water constantly, trying to wash out the dust. Infections spread faster than gossip in a small town. Partial or complete blindness is so common among older workers that they have an informal guild system where the blind teach rope making to earn food. Kidney stones become your body's way of making its own marble monuments. The combination of dehydration, calcium-heavy dust, and the fact that you're essentially eating and breathing liquefied rock creates perfect conditions for these little internal torture devices. Passing a kidney stone with 17th century medical care is an experience that makes grown men cry for their mothers and convert to religions they've never heard of, just in case one of them helps. Your joints are staging their own rebellion. The cartilage wears away from the constant stress, leaving bone grinding on bone. It sounds like a peppermill and feels worse. Your knees especially take a beating from all the kneeling required for detail work. Some workers develop permanent calluses on their knees thick enough to serve as natural knee pads. It's evolution and fast forward, if evolution were designed by someone with a really sick sense of humor. Then there's the fun grab bag of skin conditions. Fungal infections love the combination of sweat, dirt, and communal living. Ringworm spreads through the camp like a really gross version of tag. Scabies mites throw nightly parties in your skin. Lice are so common they're basically considered co-workers. You'll develop rashes in places you didn't know could have rashes. Malnutrition is slowly dismantling you from the inside. Your teeth loosen from scurvy. Your hair falls out from protein deficiency. Your wounds won't heal properly because your body's too busy trying to keep vital organs running to worry about superficial things like skin integrity. You're essentially decomposing in slow motion while still technically alive. And through it all, you keep working. Because the alternative is no pay, no food, and no shelter. So you hack up blood-tinged phlegm, ignore the shooting pains, and pretend that growing lump is probably nothing. The marble must be cut, shaped, and placed. The Taj must rise. And if your body crumbles in the process, well, that's just the price of building someone else's immortality with your mortality. Think your workplace has cliques? Welcome to the Taj Mahal construction site, where the social stratification makes high school look like a communist utopia. At the top of this misery pyramid sit the master craftsmen, the ustads. These guys are the rock stars of the construction world. If rock stars lived in slightly better mud huts and got dysentery only half as often as everyone else. The ustads come from generations of craftsmen. Their great-great-grandfather probably carved something impressive enough that the family name still carries weight. They know the secret techniques passed down like treasured recipes, except instead of how to make grandma's special curry, it's how to cut marble so thin that light passes through it. They get individual sleeping quarters, still terrible, just private terrible, better food rations, and the right to have apprentices who hero worship them while secretly plotting their demise. Below them are the skilled workers, the journeymen who can do the work but lack the political connections or family name to join the Ustad Club. They're good enough to avoid the worst jobs, but not good enough to avoid bitter resentment. They spend their days perfecting their craft and their nights perfecting their grudges. Then come the semi-skilled workers. These are the guys who know one thing really well. Maybe you're the rope tying expert, or the scaffold building specialist, or the guy who's really good at mixing mortar that won't crumble in 2 years. You're essential but replaceable, like a medieval middle manager. You get standard rations and standard abuse, nothing special either way. The general laborers are the bottom of the free worker hierarchy. You lift, you carry, you dig, you die. No special skills means no special treatment. You're basically livestock that can complain, though complaining is strongly discouraged via methods that would make HR departments spontaneously combust. These workers are often from the lowest castes, because of course they are. Even in building a monument to love, we can't escape the caste system's death grip on human dignity. But wait, there's more stratification within each level. Muslim workers generally get preferential treatment because, shock of shocks, the Muslim emperor's Muslim overseers tend to favor their co-religionists. Hindu workers, who make up a significant portion of the workforce, especially among the skilled craftsmen, face constant micro and macro aggressions. Forced to work on a Muslim monument, paid less than their Muslim counterparts, and subjected to random searches and quality checks that somehow always find problems. Regional divisions add another layer of spice to this discrimination stew. Workers from Bengal think Rajasthani workers are uncultured stone bashers. Rajasthanis think Bengali workers are soft city boys who can't handle real work. Everyone thinks the Kashmiris are weird. It's like racism, but with more specific zip codes. The Persian and Central Asian craftsmen imported for specialized work, they're in their own category. They get the best accommodations, still awful by any objective standard, the best pay, and the insufferable attitude that comes with being the foreign consultants. They strut around giving orders in languages half the workforce doesn't understand, getting paid 5 times more for work that local craftsmen insist they could do just as well. They can't, but that's beside the point. Women workers, yes, they exist, despite what official histories might imply, occupy a special subterranean level of this hierarchy. They're not doing the skilled carving or heavy lifting. They're carrying water, preparing food, and sometimes polishing marble. They're paid a fraction of what male workers get and face the charming daily obstacle course of harassment, assault, and being blamed for distracting male workers. Some bring their children, who become the camp's youngest workers, carrying tools and messages for a few grains of rice. Age creates its own hierarchy. Young workers are abused for being inexperienced. Old workers are abused for being slow. Middle-aged workers are abused for not being young or old enough to avoid the worst jobs. It's a beautiful system where everyone gets to feel superior to someone while still being miserable. The camp has its own informal justice system, and by justice, I mean whoever has the most friends wins. Steal from an ustad? You'll be lucky if they just break your fingers. Steal from a fellow laborer? Depends on who has more cousins in camp. There's no police force, just mob rule with occasional oversight from bored guards who can be bribed with half a chapati. Even death respects the hierarchy. When an ustad dies, there's a proper funeral, prayers, and his family might even receive some compensation. When a laborer dies, they check if he has any usable tools, wrap him in whatever cloth is available, and plant him in the growing workers' cemetery outside camp. No names on the graves, just rows of stones marking where dreams of sending money home ended. This whole system is held together by a delicate balance of mutual need and mutual contempt. The ustads need the laborers to do the grunt work. The laborers need the ustads to have any hope of learning skills that might improve their situation. Everyone needs everyone else, and everyone hates everyone else. It's workplace dynamics stripped of any pretense of civility. And overseeing it all are the Mughal supervisors, who view the entire workforce with the same affection you might have for productive bacteria. Useful, necessary, but ultimately disposable. They maintain order through a combination of promised rewards, immediate punishments, and the constant reminder that there are plenty more desperate souls where you came from. The creative ways you might die death at the Taj Mahal construction site isn't a question of if, but when and how creatively. It's like a theme park designed by the Grim Reaper. So many attractions, so little time. Let's take a morbid tour through the various ways your ticket might get punched while building Shah Jahan's marble grief monument. Falling is the classic. It's quick, it's efficient, and it happens daily. The bamboo scaffolding looks like it was designed by someone who heard about engineering once, but wasn't really paying attention. Tied together with rope that's been quality tested by existing for more than a week, these structures sway in the wind like drunk giants. You're working 100 feet up, placing marble blocks, when suddenly the bamboo beneath you decides it's tired of being vertical. The fall takes about 3 seconds. The landing takes forever. Getting crushed is another crowd favorite. Those marble blocks weighing several tons, they're being moved by systems that would make OSHA inspectors weep blood. A rope frays, a pulley cracks, a wooden support gives up the ghost, and suddenly you're experiencing what geologists call extreme pressure. The lucky ones die instantly. The unlucky ones get to experience what it's like to be a human accordion, while their coworkers try to figure out if it's worth attempting a rescue or if they should just start digging around you. Heat stroke is the silent killer. It doesn't have the dramatic flair of falling or the spectacular gore of crushing, but it's efficient. You're working in 115 degrees Fahrenheit heat, wearing whatever rags you call clothes, sweating out fluids you can't replace fast enough. First comes the dizziness, but everyone's dizzy, so you push through. Then the nausea, but the food is so bad, nausea is normal. Then your body just stops. You collapse, your core temperature somewhere between fever and well done. And unless someone immediately drags you to shade and starts pouring water on you, you're checking out. The overseer's response? Clear the body, we're behind schedule. Infection is playing the long game. That tiny cut from a chisel? In a week, it's red and swollen. In 2 weeks, you've got red streaks running up your arm like evil racing stripes. In 3 weeks, you're delirious with fever. And the camp doctor, a guy who once saw someone do medicine, is suggesting amputation with a saw that's been used on 15 other infected limbs without cleaning. Sepsis in the 17th century is basically your body throwing a going-away party for itself. Workplace violence is what happens when you pack thousands of exhausted, underpaid, culturally diverse men into a small space and add stress. Arguments over food portions turn into knife fights. Regional rivalries explode into full brawls. Someone accuses someone else of stealing, of slacking, of looking at them wrong, and suddenly there's a crowd gathered to watch 2 malnourished men try to beat each other to death with mason's tools. The overseers let it happen. It's entertainment and population control rolled into one. Disease is the real overachiever in the death department. Cholera sweeps through the camp like a tourist on a tight schedule, turning workers into dehydrated husks in hours. Dysentery is so common it has nicknames. Typhoid, typhus, and tuberculosis compete for high scores. Malaria comes in seasonal waves, announced by mosquitoes that treat the stagnant water around camp like a breeding resort. The bubonic plague makes guest appearances, because why not? It's like a microbiology convention where your intestines are the venue. The Ustads come from generations of craftsmen. Their great-great-grandfather probably carved something impressive enough that the family name still carries weight. They know the secret home. Haven't seen your family in years, your body is failing, and you're building a monument to someone else's love, while your own life is loveless. The Yamuna River starts looking awfully inviting. Workers who slip off scaffolding on calm days, who accidentally position themselves under falling blocks, who simply walk into the river with pockets full of stones. Their deaths are recorded as accidents, but everyone knows. Animal attacks add exotic flair to the mortality statistics. The construction site attracts scavengers, jackals, wild dogs, and the occasional leopard who's figured out that sick workers are easier prey than healthy deer. Cobra bites are common enough that there's a betting pool on monthly totals. Scorpions hide in the reed bundles used for scaffolding, delivering surprise acupuncture with a fatal twist. Starvation is the slow burn option. Your rations get cut because of supply issues, corruption, or just because someone up the chain needs to show a profit. You're doing hard physical labor on maybe 1,000 calories a day. Your body starts eating itself. Muscle first, then organs. You become a walking skeleton, still trying to lift blocks, until one day you just don't get up. They find you in your sleeping spot, finally at peace, weighing about as much as the clothes you died in. Execution is what happens when you really mess up. Steal from the Emperor's marble supply? Death. Get caught trying to sabotage the construction? Death. Kill another worker? Death. But only if he was important. Lead a work revolt? Creative death, usually involving being trampled by elephants. Because the Mughals understood that regular execution was boring. The truly disturbing part, your death is already factored into the project timeline. The overseers know what the daily mortality rate is. They plan for it. There's probably a clerk somewhere tallying deaths like inventory. Lost 12 to heat, 8 to falls, 6 to fever, 1 to elephant. Request 30 new workers by next week. You're not a person. You're a replaceable part in a massive machine designed to turn human suffering into architectural beauty. And when you die, if you're lucky, someone might remember your name for a few days. More likely, you'll be buried in a mass grave, unmarked and unmourned, while the Taj Mahal rises above you. A monument to love built on a foundation of bones. History books love to pretend the Taj Mahal was built exclusively by men, as if marble blocks levitated into place through the sheer force of masculine energy. Surprise! Women were there too, and their experience was its own special category of hell, with extra helpings of exploitation and a side of erasure. Most women at the construction site weren't there by choice. When are they ever? They came as wives following husbands, daughters following fathers, or widows with no other options. Some were camp followers, providing various services from cooking to, well, the kinds of services that make historians clutch their pearls and change the subject. Others were skilled workers in their own right, though you'd never know it from official records that somehow forgot to mention them. The women doing manual labor had the worst of all worlds. They got the same back-breaking work, carrying water, grinding mortar, polishing marble, but at a fraction of the pay. A male water carrier might get 2 pays a day. A woman doing the same job got maybe 1 if she was lucky. The logic, if you can call it that, was that women didn't need as much money because they had men to support them. Never mind that many of these women were supporting children, elderly parents, or husbands who'd been crushed by marble blocks last Tuesday. Water carrying was the most common job for women, and it was its own special torture. Picture walking miles in the scorching heat with a heavy clay pot on your head, from the river to the construction site, back and forth, dawn to dusk. The pots were porous, so water would slowly leak, making them lighter, but also meaning you'd make more trips. Your neck developed permanent grooves from the weight. Your spine compressed like an accordion. But hey, at least you got to be outside, unlike the women stuck in the cooking areas. The camp kitchens were Dante's Inferno with chapati. Hundreds of women crowded into poorly ventilated spaces, working over open fires and temperatures that would make a volcano sweat. They ground grain by hand, kneaded massive amounts of dough, and stirred cauldrons of dal that could double as bathtubs. The smoke was so thick you could cut it with a knife, which was convenient since knives were one of the few things in good supply. Respiratory problems were universal. Burns were constant. The pay was insulting. But at least the kitchen workers had some protection from the elements, and the male workers. Women working in the open faced a daily gauntlet of harassment that would make a modern HR department spontaneously combust. Catcalls were the mild stuff. Groping was expected. Actual assault was common enough that women developed buddy systems, never working alone, always within screaming distance of each other. Not that screaming helped much, when the authorities' response was usually to blame the woman for inviting trouble by existing. The pregnant workers, yes, they kept working because starving while pregnant isn't great for the baby either, had their own special challenges. No maternity leave in 1638. You worked until the baby literally fell out of you, then you were back at it within days if you survived. Miscarriages were common, blamed on everything from evil eyes to moral failings, never on the fact that lifting heavy loads in extreme heat while malnourished might be bad for pregnancy. Women who gave birth at the camp faced mortality rates that would make a medieval plague look like a mild cold. No midwives, unless another camp woman knew what she was doing. No clean water, unless you count the same contaminated stuff everyone was drinking. No medical care beyond pray harder. The infant mortality rate was so high that women often didn't name babies until they'd survived a few months, because why get attached? Children who did survive became the camp's youngest workers. Girls as young as 5 or 6 would help their mothers carry water or prepare food. Boys would run messages or carry tools. Education was a luxury reserved for people who didn't need to worry about their next meal. These kids grew up fast. Childhood compressed into a few short years before the camp claimed them as workers. The skilled female workers, and yes, they existed, were mostly involved in the decorative arts. Some women specialized in the intricate inlay work, their smaller fingers supposedly better suited for placing tiny pieces of semi-precious stones. Others worked on the less celebrated but equally important tasks like polishing marble to a mirror finish. They were paid even less than male workers doing the same job, because apparently having a uterus made your work less valuable. The sex workers, let's not pretend they weren't there, occupied their own complex position in the camp hierarchy. They provided a service that everyone pretended didn't exist while simultaneously relying on. They faced violence from clients, disease from lack of protection, condoms wouldn't be invented for another 2 centuries, and social ostracism from the respectable women. Many were widows or abandoned wives with no other way to feed their children. They charged what they could, survived what they had to, and died young from diseases that no one bothered to treat. Older women who couldn't do physical labor anymore became the camp's informal healers, matchmakers, and keepers of gossip. They knew which herbs might help with dysentery, spoiler, not many, who was sleeping with whom, and how to deliver babies with whatever was handy. They were paid in food scraps and grudging respect, which was more than most women got. The religious divide affected women too. Muslim women had slightly better positions if they were connected to male workers in good standing. Hindu women faced additional discrimination, especially if they were from lower castes. Widows, regardless of religion, were at the bottom of everyone's social ladder, blamed for their husbands' deaths and treated as bad luck incarnate. Even in death, women were erased. The workers' cemetery had sections for different groups, but women were often buried in unmarked areas, their names unrecorded, their contributions forgotten. They built the Taj Mahal just as surely as any man, but history decided their stories weren't worth preserving. So when you see those photos of the Taj Mahal, all pristine white marble and architectural poetry, remember the invisible women who polished that marble, who carried the water to mix the mortar, who cooked the food that kept workers alive, who bore the children that became the next generation of workers. They're not in the tour guides or the coffee table books, but they're there in every stone, every inch of inlay, every perfectly smooth surface. Ghosts of women who built a monument to one woman's memory while their own names were dust. Let's talk about the culinary delights of being a Taj Mahal construction worker. And by delights, I mean the daily gastrointestinal Russian roulette that passed for meals. The food situation was less nutrition and more, how much sawdust can we add before people notice? Your daily ration was supposedly calculated to keep you functional. Not healthy, not happy, just capable of lifting heavy things without immediately dying. The math was simple. Minimum calories for maximum work output. It's like they were programming humans using the world's worst algorithm. Breakfast, if you can call it that, was usually a chapati, flatbread, that had the consistency of leather and tasted like disappointment. Made from the cheapest flour available, often mixed with things that weren't quite flour but looked flour adjacent in dim light, these chapatis could double as roof tiles in a pinch. You'd get maybe 2, if the person distributing food didn't hate your face that particular morning. The dal, lentil soup, was a masterpiece of minimalism. Imagine someone described the concept of soup to someone who had never seen water, and that person tried to recreate it using puddle water and whatever legumes were too damaged to sell at market. The lentils were more suggestion than substance, floating in a broth so thin it was basically homeopathic. On good days, you could count the individual lentils. On bad days, you wondered if they forgot to add any. Rice, when available, was the broken variety, the stuff that proper people wouldn't feed to chickens. It was often mixed with stones, husks, and the occasional surprise protein in the form of weevils. You learned to chew carefully unless you wanted to crack a tooth on a pebble. Dental care, as you might imagine, was not included in your worker benefits package. Vegetables were whatever was cheap, old, and wouldn't sell in the regular market. Onions so far past their prime they were practically liquid. Gourds that had given up on life. Spinach that was more stem than leaf. Everything was cooked until it surrendered completely, turning into a gray-green sludge that tasted like defeat, seasoned with dirt. Meat was a theoretical concept for most workers. Maybe during Eid or Diwali, they'd slaughter a goat and divide it among hundreds of workers. You'd get a piece of meat, so small it needed its own search party to find it in your bowl. The bones, however, were plentiful. You'd suck on them like the world's saddest lollipops, trying to extract every last molecule of flavor. The cooking process added its own special flavors. Everything was prepared in massive cauldrons that were cleaned occasionally. The previous day's burnt bits added a certain je ne sais quoi, if by that you mean carbon scoring and the ghosts of yesterday's disappointments. The cooks, usually the lowest-ranking women in camp, did their best with what they had, which wasn't much. They performed daily miracles, turning edible ingredients into merely unpleasant meals. Water for cooking came from the same sources as drinking water, which is to say it was pre-contaminated for your convenience. Boiling killed some of the bacteria, but concentrated others, creating a bacterial thunderdome where only the strongest, most stomach-destroying organisms survived. Every meal was a gamble with your digestive system. Spices were used less for flavor and more as a desperate attempt to mask the taste of spoilage. Turmeric, cheap and plentiful, turned everything yellow and helped hide the gray color of meat that had seen better days. Chili was added in quantities that would make your ancestors weep, not for taste, but because spicy food made you feel something other than despair. Food storage was an adventure in microbiology. In the Indian heat, everything spoiled at the speed of light. The morning's chapati would be sporting a fuzzy coat by evening. Cooked dal left out for a few hours would develop a personality and possibly primitive consciousness. But you ate it anyway because the alternative was nothing. During the monsoon, everything was damp. Your chapati was damp. Your dal was somehow even more watery. Mold grew on everything like it was racing for a prize. The kitchen areas flooded, mixing cooking water with whatever was floating by. Cholera season, they called it, though season implies it ever stopped. The psychological torture of the food was almost worse than the physical effects. You'd remember your mother's cooking, the festivals at home, the taste of fresh vegetables from your own garden. Then you'd look down at the gray slop in your brass cup and wonder if taste buds could die from sadness. Spoiler, they can't, which is unfortunate because it means you taste every horrible bite. Some enterprising workers tried to supplement their diet by catching fish from the Yamuna, the same Yamuna that served as the camp's unofficial sewage system. The fish, fed on a steady diet of human waste and industrial runoff from the construction, tasted exactly like you'd expect. But protein was protein, and beggars couldn't be choosers, though even beggars might have passed on these fish. Alcohol was technically forbidden, especially for Muslim workers, but human misery finds a way. Various fermented concoctions appeared, made from rotting fruit, questionable grains, or whatever could be persuaded to develop alcohol content. It tasted like paint thinner, mixed with regret, but it made the food seem marginally more bearable and helped you forget that tomorrow's menu would be exactly the same. The cruel irony was that you were building one of the world's most beautiful monuments while eating food that looked like it had already been digested once. The Taj Mahal would host future royal banquets, its tables groaning under the weight of delicacies, while the workers who built it survived on gruel that wouldn't be served in prison. And yet, somehow, this terrible food kept thousands of workers just functional enough to continue building. It's a testament to the human body's ability to survive on almost nothing, and the human spirit's ability to endure even when that survival tastes like boiled sadness with a side of grit. When you got sick or injured at the Taj Mahal construction site, and notice I said when, not if, your medical options ranged from pray harder to die quieter. The healthcare system was essentially a guy who once saw someone do medicine, armed with rusty tools and the medical knowledge of a particularly dim turnip. The camp hospital was a generous term for a tent where they put people who were too sick to work but not quite dead enough to bury. It was less a place of healing and more a waiting room for the afterlife. The beds were the same straw mats used everywhere else, now with the added bonus of being pre-infected by the previous occupants' various diseases. Privacy was achieved by the clever medical technique of everyone's too sick to care what's happening to the guy next to them. Your medical practitioners came in several flavors, all of them bad. There was the Hakim, trained in Unani medicine, whose treatment philosophy seemed to be, if it doesn't kill you, it might cure you. Their favorite prescriptions involved mysterious pastes made from herbs, minerals, and what you hoped was just mud. These concoctions were applied to everything from broken bones to dysentery, with roughly the same success rate, 0. Then there were the traditional healers, whose medical knowledge was passed down through generations like a game of telephone played by people who didn't speak the same language. They relied heavily on amulets, prayers, and treatments that involved a disturbing amount of pigeon blood. Why pigeon blood? Nobody knew. But at this point, you were desperate enough to try anything. For serious injuries like crushed limbs or deep cuts, the treatment options were bleakly simple. Amputation was performed with tools that did double duty in the kitchen. The saw used to remove your gangrenous foot in the morning might be cutting firewood by afternoon. Anesthesia was a leather strap to bite on and several men to hold you down. The survival rate was what you'd expect when surgery is performed with the hygiene standards of a butcher shop in a heat wave. Infections were treated with a combination of hope and whatever looked medicinal. Wounds were packed with substances ranging from honey, actually not terrible, to cow dung, absolutely terrible. The theory seemed to be that if you threw enough different things at an infection, something might work. Usually, what worked was your immune system giving up and taking you with it. Broken bones were set by people whose understanding of anatomy came from bones go inside body somewhere. If you were lucky, they'd get it mostly right and you'd heal with only a moderate deformity. If you were unlucky, they'd make it worse, and you'd spend the rest of your shortened life walking in circles. Fever was treated with the medical equivalent of thoughts and prayers. They might try to cool you down with water that was definitely not clean, or warm you up with blankets that had seen better decades. Bloodletting was popular because apparently losing blood when you're already sick is exactly what your body needs. The pharmacy was a collection of jars containing things that looked like they'd been scraped off the bottom of the Yamuna. Ground pearls for the rich who weren't there, ground chalk for the poor, everyone. Mercury was handed out for various ailments because nothing says medicine like liquid metal that drives you insane before it kills you. Disease prevention was a concept as foreign as actual foreign medical knowledge. Quarantine meant moving the sick person slightly farther from the healthy people, maybe to the other side of the tent. Hygiene consisted of occasionally waving smoke around and hoping it carried away the bad air that everyone believed caused disease. Mental health treatment was even more primitive if that's possible. Suffering from what we'd now recognize as PTSD from watching your friends get crushed by marble blocks? That's demon possession, clearly. The treatment? Beat the demons out, literally. Depression from being separated from your family for years? That's a moral failing. Work harder. Pain management was particularly creative. For minor pain, you got told to stop complaining. For major pain, you got told to stop complaining louder. Opium existed, but was expensive, so it was reserved for people who mattered. You did not matter. You got to experience pain in its full, undiluted glory. The medical records, such as they were, read like a horror story written by someone who'd never heard of plot structure. Patient complained of stomach pain, applied hot stones, patient died. Next patient complained of stomach pain, applied cold stones, patient also died. Conclusion: stomachs are tricky. Childbirth in the medical tent was its own special nightmare. Midwifery was performed by whoever had seen the most births, which didn't mean they knew what they were doing. The mortality rate for mothers and babies was so high that survival was considered a minor miracle worthy of whatever offerings you could scrape together. The dental care deserves its own mention. Toothaches were treated by extraction, performed by the same person who probably cut your hair. Their technique involved primitive pliers, no painkillers, and the firm belief that if they pulled hard enough, the problem would come out. Sometimes it was the tooth, sometimes it was part of your jaw. Either way, the toothache stopped, eventually. The camp's approach to epidemics was essentially, let it burn through the population and see who's left. When cholera or typhoid swept through, the medical response was to pile the bodies faster and keep the work going. The idea of preventing disease transmission was as foreign as the concept of washing hands between patients. Traditional remedies ranged from the harmless but useless, wearing a specific color thread around your wrist, to the actively harmful, drinking water in which certain metals had been soaked. The placebo effect was the most effective treatment available, which tells you everything you need to know about the rest of the medical care. And through it all, the construction continued. Workers would drag themselves from the medical tent back to the construction site, held together by dirty bandages and pure desperation. Because being sick was a luxury you couldn't afford, and proper medical care was a fantasy that belonged to a different world entirely. The true medical miracle of the Taj Mahal wasn't any healing that occurred. It was that anyone survived long enough to see it completed. When your life consists of dodging falling marble blocks and trying not to die from dysentery, religion becomes less about spiritual enlightenment and more about cosmic insurance. At the Taj Mahal construction site, faith wasn't just practiced. It was desperately clutched like the last chapati in a famine. The Muslim workers had it easier, if you can call anything about their situation easy. They were building an Islamic monument, after all, so their prayers were officially sanctioned. 5 times a day, the azan would cut through the construction noise, and work would theoretically pause. In practice, you got maybe 2 minutes to perform the world's fastest wudu, ablution, with water that was definitely not clean. Then speed pray while your overseer tapped his foot impatiently. The prayer areas were designated spots of packed dirt where thousands of men had prostrated themselves into the ground, creating human-shaped depressions in the earth. You'd line up shoulder to shoulder with workers who hadn't bathed in weeks, trying to focus on Allah while the guy next to you smelled like he'd died and been reanimated through sheer willpower. Friday prayers were mandatory for Muslim workers, which sounds nice until you realize it meant losing precious work hours and potentially being docked pay. The Imam's sermons invariably focused on how building the Taj was a holy act that would guarantee paradise. Convenient how religious duty aligned so perfectly with imperial construction needs. Hindu workers faced a more complex religious landscape. They were building a monument to someone else's faith while trying to maintain their own. Many wore hidden sacred threads under their clothes, performed abbreviated pujas in the pre-dawn darkness, and whispered mantras while they worked. The lucky ones might have a small murti, idol, hidden in their belongings, pulled out for desperate prayers when the overseers weren't looking. The caste system, that divine justification for human misery, was in full effect. Brahmin craftsmen wouldn't eat with lower caste workers, even though they were all covered in the same marble dust and sweat. The untouchables were relegated to the worst jobs, handling dead animals, cleaning latrines, and other tasks that made regular construction work look like a vacation. They weren't even allowed to pray at the same shrines as other Hindu workers, because apparently the gods were also into social discrimination. Both communities had their holy men wandering the camp, Islamic fakirs promised blessings in exchange for whatever food you could spare. Hindu sadhus offered sacred ash and predictions about when you'd see your family again. Spoiler, their accuracy rate was abysmal. These religious figures were part spiritual guide, part therapist, and part con artist, selling hope to the hopeless at premium prices. Religious festivals were the only real breaks in the grinding monotony. During Eid, Muslim workers might get actual meat in their food and a day off. Diwali meant Hindu workers could light small clay lamps and pretend, for a few hours, that life contained something other than suffering. Holi was celebrated by throwing colored powder that mixed with the marble dust to create new and exciting shades of respiratory problems. But these celebrations were always tinged with sadness. You were celebrating away from family, in a place where joy felt like a foreign language. The festivals reminded you of what you were missing more than what you had. Death rituals were where religious differences became most stark. Muslim workers who died were supposed to be buried within 24 hours, facing Mecca. Hindu workers needed cremation, with specific rites performed by specific people. In practice, both communities often had to compromise their religious requirements. Bodies piled up faster than they could be properly handled. Mass graves became common. Cremation wood was expensive and often unavailable. The workers' cemetery was segregated by religion, because apparently, even in death, we couldn't all just get along. Muslims on one side, Hindus on another, and a special section for those whose religion nobody was quite sure about. The graves were unmarked beyond simple stones, no names, no dates, just rows of anonymous dead who gave their lives for someone else's monument to love. Prayer became a constant background hum to construction work, not the formal, structured prayers of organized religion, but the constant, desperate bargaining with any deity who might be listening. Let me survive today. Let that rope hold. Let my family be okay. Let this cough not be the plague. Every action was accompanied by its own little prayer, creating a symphony of desperation in a dozen languages. Amulets and talismans were universal. Muslim workers wore verses from the Quran in small metal containers. Hindus had sacred threads, small metal images of deities, or marks of ash and turmeric. Everyone had something: a piece of cloth from a holy shrine, a stone from a sacred river, anything that might provide protection in a world that seemed actively trying to kill you. The cruel irony was that you were building one of the most spiritually significant monuments in the Islamic world, while your own spiritual needs were treated as inconveniences. The Taj would have verses from the Quran inlaid in precious stones, while the workers who placed those stones couldn't afford a proper prayer mat. Some workers found their faith strengthened by the suffering. If this life was this horrible, surely the next one had to be better. Others lost it entirely, wondering what kind of gods would allow this level of misery. Most landed somewhere in between, practicing their faith out of habit, hope, and the simple human need to believe that someone, somewhere, gave a damn about their suffering. And maybe that's what religion really was at the construction site, not theology or philosophy, but a simple desperate hope that all this suffering meant something. That somewhere in the cosmic accounting, their pain was being noted, their sacrifice recorded. That building this monument to earthly love might earn them some divine consideration. Because when you're building someone else's paradise with your own hands while living in hell, you need to believe in something. Even if that something is just the promise that one day somehow the suffering will end. After years of breathing marble dust, losing fingers to falling blocks, and surviving on gruel that wouldn't pass as food in a famine, The Taj Mahal is finally nearing completion. And here's the beautiful irony. You, the worker who spent the best years of your life building it, will never see it in its full glory. Not because you'll be dead, though statistically that's likely, but because people like you don't get to walk through the front door of places like this. The last pieces of marble are being polished to a shine so perfect you could see your malnourished reflection in them if you were allowed close enough to look. The precious stone inlays are being set with tolerances so precise that modern craftsmen struggle to replicate them. The calligraphy is being perfected, Quranic verses flowing across white marble like divine poetry. And you're still hauling waste rocks and trying not to die from whatever disease is making the rounds this week. As completion nears, a different kind of worker appears. These aren't the dusty, broken men who've been here since the beginning. These are specialists brought in for the finishing touches. People who work with gold leaf, who know how to mix pigments that won't fade, who understand the acoustic properties needed to make the Emperor's prayers echo just right. They look at you veterans the way you might look at the pack animals, necessary for the heavy lifting, but not really worth acknowledging. The gardens are being planted now. The charbag, the 4-part paradise garden that will surround the tomb, requires its own army of workers. You watch as they dig channels for fountains that will spray crystal clear water, not the brown sludge you've been drinking for years. Trees are being planted in perfect symmetry, flowers arranged in patterns that will bloom in coordinated colors. It's paradise being built on earth, and you're not even allowed to walk on the grass. The finishing work is meticulous beyond belief. Craftsmen spend days on a single flower in the marble inlay, making sure each petal is perfect. The acoustic engineering is tested and retested. The dome must amplify prayers in just the right way. The optical illusions built into the architecture are refined so that Quranic verses appear to be the same size whether you're near or far. It's genius-level mathematics and engineering, and you appreciate none of it because you're too busy trying not to pass out from heat exhaustion. Security increases as completion approaches. The guards, who previously couldn't be bothered to stop workers from fighting, suddenly become very interested in making sure no one steals even a chip of marble. There are rumors that workers involved in the most secret aspects of construction, the actual burial chamber, the hidden passages, might be killed to protect the architectural secrets. You hope you're not important enough to know anything worth dying for. The cleanup operation begins, and it's darkly hilarious. The same overseers who let you live in filth for years suddenly care about appearances. The workers' camp, that sprawling shanty town of misery and disease, needs to be cleared out. Can't have the emperor seeing where his monument was actually built. The shanties are torn down, the cemetery is conveniently forgotten, and evidence of the human cost is erased like chalk in the rain. You're part of the removal crew, destroying your own home, such as it was. The irony isn't lost on you. You built one of the world's wonders, and now you're demolishing the place where you lived while building it. It's like being asked to erase yourself from history, while history is still being written. Some workers are kept on for maintenance. Someone needs to keep polishing that marble, trimming those gardens, maintaining those water features. But most are simply dismissed. Thanks for the 20 years of service. Here's your final payment, minus deductions for food, shelter, and breathing. Now get out. No pension, no recognition, no thanks for sacrificing your body to build this monument. Just a pat on the back if you're lucky, a kick in the ass if you're not. The opening ceremonies are planned, and obviously, you're not invited. Nobles will come from across the empire to marvel at Shah Jahan's devotion to his wife. Poets will compose verses about the architectural poetry. Future generations will call it a wonder of the world. And you'll be trying to figure out how to get home with ruined lungs and enough money to maybe feed yourself for a month. Some workers can't leave. Their bodies are too broken, their homes too far away, or they simply have nowhere else to go. They become beggars in Agra's streets, living in the shadow of what they built. Tourists in future centuries will step over them to get a better photo angle, never knowing they're literally walking on the men who made their Instagram moment possible. The cruelest cut? You're not even allowed to visit as a regular person. The Taj Mahal, built by common laborers, will be reserved for the elite. Guards will turn away anyone who looks too poor, too dirty, too much like the people who actually built it. You can see it from a distance, that white marble dream floating above the city, but you can't touch what your hands created. At night, when the moon hits the marble just right, they say the Taj glows like captured starlight. You wouldn't know. You're too busy coughing up the marble dust that's slowly turning your lungs to stone. They say the acoustic properties are so perfect that a whisper carries from one end to the other. You wouldn't know. Your ears are damaged from years of construction noise. They say the optical illusions make it seem like the building floats. You wouldn't know. Your eyes are clouded from years of dust and damage. You built a wonder of the world, and your reward is to wonder what it actually looks like completed. You gave your health, your youth, possibly your life, to create beauty you'll never be allowed to properly see. The Taj Mahal will stand for centuries, visited by millions, photographed by billions. And somewhere in every perfectly polished stone, in every precisely cut marble block, in every delicate inlay, is the ghost of a worker who built paradise and was barred from entering it. The final insult? History will forget you entirely. Oh, it'll remember Shah Jahan's grief. It'll remember the architects' names. It'll wax poetic about the love story behind the monument. But the 20,000 workers who actually built it, you'll be compressed into a single line in a guidebook. It took 20,000 workers 22 years to complete. No names, no stories, no acknowledgement of the suffering. Just a statistic as cold as the marble you spent your life polishing. So the Taj is finished, the emperor has had his photo op, or whatever the 17th century equivalent was, and you're still alive. Congratulations, you've won the worst lottery ever. Now comes the part historians conveniently skip. What happens to thousands of workers when the world's biggest construction project suddenly ends? First, let's talk about your body, or what's left of it. 20+ years of hard labor haven't been kind. Your lungs are basically marble storage facilities. That persistent cough isn't going away. It's your body's way of trying to expel stones you're growing internally. Silicosis doesn't care that the job is over. It's going to keep eating your lungs until breathing becomes an Olympic sport you can't win. Your hands are claws permanently shaped to hold tools. Try to open them fully. Can't? That's because tendons have shortened, joints have fused, and flexibility is a memory from your youth. Those fingers that placed delicate stone flowers in marble are now gnarled roots that can barely hold a cup without shaking. Your back has developed its own gravitational field, pulling you toward the earth you'll soon be buried in. Standing straight is impossible. You walk with the permanent stoop of someone who spent 2 decades bent over their work. Children point at your shuffling gait. Adults look away, uncomfortable with this reminder of what building beauty actually costs. Finding work after the Taj is like trying to sell ice in winter. Sure, you have skills, but so do thousands of other broken men flooding the job market. Plus, you're old. If you're 40, you're ancient by laborer standards, injured and frankly, terrifying to look at. Employers see you coming and suddenly remember they're fully staffed. Some workers try to return home, only to discover home doesn't exist anymore. 20 years is a long time. Your village might have been abandoned after a drought. Your family might have moved on, assuming you died years ago. Your wife might have remarried. Hard to blame her when you vanished for 2 decades with only sporadic messages and even more sporadic money. If you do make it home, you're a stranger. Your children don't recognize you. How could they? You left when they were babies. You return as a wheezing specter who claims to be their father. Your wife looks at you with eyes that mix pity, resentment, and the dawning horror that you're now another mouth to feed when you can barely work. The money you saved disappears fast. Medical treatment for your various ailments eats through it like acid. Traditional healers promise cures for your marble lung, your twisted spine, your failing eyesight. They take your money and give you potions that taste like defeat and work about as well as prayer, which is to say, not at all. Many workers can't leave Agra. They become part of the city's permanent underclass, begging in the streets they helped build. The bitter irony of sitting outside the Taj, cup in hand, watching wealthy visitors admire your handiwork while you slowly starve? It's poetry, if poetry were written by someone who genuinely hated you. The skilled craftsmen have it marginally better. Some find work on other projects, though nothing will ever match the Taj in scope or prestige. But even they carry the scars. Master marble inlayers with hands that shake from nerve damage. Calligraphers whose eyes have failed from years of detail work. Architects who drink to forget the men crushed by their designs. Mental health isn't a concept that exists yet, but that doesn't mean the trauma isn't real. You can't watch men die daily for 20 years without it affecting you. Night terrors about falling blocks. Panic attacks when you hear sounds similar to construction noise. The inability to look at white marble without feeling sick. You self-medicate with whatever's available, alcohol, opium if you can afford it, or just the numbing embrace of despair. The government's response to thousands of unemployed construction workers? Exactly what you'd expect. Nothing. No pensions, no support, no recognition. You're yesterday's news, and yesterday's news is used to wrap fish. Some vague promises are made about future projects, but everyone knows they're lies told to prevent riots. Some workers turn to crime. When you've spent 20 years taking orders and breaking your body for someone else's glory, the moral flexibility required for theft seems minor. Plus, you know the city's layout, its wealthy areas, its weak points. The same skills that built the Taj can be repurposed for less noble ends. Others simply disappear. They walk into the desert, into the river, into oblivion. No one keeps statistics on worker suicides, but the Yamuna claims many former builders who decide drowning is preferable to slow starvation. Their bodies float past the Taj, a morbid reminder of the human cost that tourists prefer to ignore. The younger workers, those who started as children and are now adults, have known nothing but construction. They don't know how to farm, how to trade, how to do anything but cut and carry marble. They're a lost generation, raised in the camps, educated by suffering, and released into a world they're not equipped to handle. Family planning wasn't a thing, so many workers have children they've never met or barely know. These kids grow up with the stigma of being Taj orphans, technically having fathers but practically abandoned. They inherit poverty, health problems from their father's occupational diseases. and the bitter knowledge that their family was sacrificed for someone else's monument. The camp followers, the cooks, water carriers, sex workers are cast aside even more callously. At least the male workers get the cold comfort of having built something lasting. These women, who kept the workforce fed and functional, are erased entirely. They scatter like dust, trying to find new camps, new construction sites, new ways to survive. Some workers develop obsessions with the Taj. They return repeatedly, standing outside, just staring at it. Is it pride? Regret? A desperate attempt to find meaning in their suffering? Guards eventually learn to recognize and chase away these ghosts who haunt their own creation. The rare worker who manages to sneak inside for a look often breaks down completely. Seeing the finished product, the beauty, the perfection, the peace compared to the violence of its creation is too much. They weep for their lost years, their broken bodies, their dead friends. They weep for the bitter joke that they built paradise and earned only hell. In the end, the aftermath is silence. History moves on, forgetting the builders in favor of the built. Tour guides will speak of Shah Jahan's love, Mumtaz's beauty, the architectural genius. They won't mention the workers dying of marble lung in Agra's slums. They won't talk about the families destroyed, the bodies broken, the lives erased. The Taj Mahal stands eternal, a monument to love, but it's also a monument to forgotten suffering, to the men and women who gave everything and received nothing. Their names aren't carved in marble. Their stories aren't told to tourists. They're the ghosts in the foundation, the whispers in the walls, the shadows that fall across all that pristine white beauty. And maybe that's the ultimate tragedy. Not that they suffered, but that their suffering has been so thoroughly erased. The Taj Mahal is beautiful. It's also a graveyard where the bodies are hidden underneath the gift shop, and the screams are drowned out by camera clicks. Today, the Taj Mahal is India's most famous tourist attraction, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and a monument to eternal love that makes people weep with its beauty. It's also a monument to historical amnesia, so complete it should win awards for creative forgetting. Let's talk about the lies we tell ourselves to make the pretty building more palatable. The official narrative goes something like this. Shah Jahan loved his wife so much that when she died, he built the world's most beautiful tomb. 20,000 workers labored for 22 years, creating an architectural masterpiece. Isn't love grand? Cue the sunset photos and the honeymoon selfies. What's conveniently edited out? Oh, just the minor details. Like how those 20,000 workers were often forced labor. How they died by the thousands. How they lived in conditions that would make modern refugee camps look like resorts. How they were paid in promises and buried in unmarked graves. But hey, those details don't look good on postcards. Tour guides spin tales of architectural genius and divine inspiration. They'll point out the optical illusions, the acoustic marvels, the perfect symmetry. They won't point out the workers' cemetery, conveniently built over, the camp remains, conveniently demolished, or the generational trauma, conveniently ignored. It's like giving a tour of a plantation and only talking about the lovely architecture. The romanticization is particularly galling. Couples pose for engagement photos where workers died of heat stroke. Honeymooners kiss where children carried marble until their backs broke. Instagram influencers talk about couple goals at a monument built on forced labor. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a chisel. The same kind workers used while dying of silicosis. Modern restoration efforts are their own kind of comedy. Millions are spent to keep the marble white, to maintain the gardens, to preserve the integrity of the structure. Where was this concern for preservation when it came to preserving the lives of the builders? Oh, right, human lives don't bring in tourist dollars. The economic arguments are particularly rich. The Taj brings in crucial tourism revenue. Sure, now it does. But let's do some math. 20,000 workers for 22 years. That's 440,000 man-years of labor. How many of their descendants are still in poverty? How many family lines ended because Dad breathed marble dust until his lungs gave out? But please, tell me more about the tourism revenue. UNESCO calls it a jewel of Muslim art in India. They don't call it a monument to labor exploitation or a masterpiece of human suffering. The plaques talk about architectural innovation, not innovative ways to work people to death. The audio guides explain the symbolism of the gardens, not the symbolism of building paradise on the backs of the damned. Indian nationalist politics adds another layer of irony. The Taj is simultaneously a symbol of India's greatness and a foreign Muslim monument. Politicians argue about its place in Indian identity, while nobody argues about compensating the descendants of its builders. It's easier to fight about whether it represents Indian culture than to acknowledge it represents Indian workers ground into dust. The preservation efforts themselves are a cruel joke. The government worries about air pollution affecting the marble. There's less concern about what that same marble did to human lungs. They install air filters to protect the stone, while the descendants of the builders still breathe the polluted air of poverty. The monument gets better health care than the people who built it ever did. School children learn about the Taj as a wonder of the world. They memorize dates, architectural features, the love story. They don't learn about labor conditions, mortality rates, or economic exploitation. We're teaching kids that beauty justifies suffering, that art excuses abuse, that the end result matters more than the human cost. What a lovely lesson for the next generation. The Bollywood version is even worse. Films set at the Taj focus on royal romance, not royal exploitation. Shah Jahan is portrayed as a devoted husband, not a despot who worked thousands to death. The workers, if they appear at all, are happy background extras, cheerfully building someone else's monument to love. It's historical fiction, where the fiction has eaten the history. Travel blogs gush about the spiritual experience of seeing the Taj. Spiritual, really? Is it the ghosts of dead workers that make it spiritual? The screams embedded in the marble? The blood mixed into the mortar? Or is spiritual just code for, I don't want to think about the uncomfortable bits? The photography is its own form of erasure. Millions of photos are taken yearly, all carefully framed to show beauty, not brutality. The angles are chosen to highlight architectural perfection, not the human imperfection that built it. Photographers wait for the perfect light to hit the marble, the same light that once beat down on workers until they collapsed. Even this essay, pointing out the suffering, becomes part of the problem. It's easier to write about historical suffering than contemporary exploitation. We can comfortably condemn 17th century labor practices while buying products made in conditions not much better. The Taj is safely in the past, where we can tut-tut about injustice without doing anything about it. The real modern lie is that we've learned anything. We still build our wonders on the backs of the poor. We still value the creation over the creator. We still tell stories that erase suffering in favor of beauty. The only difference is now we do it with better PR. Tourists still flock to the Taj, still gasp at its beauty, still take their photos. And underneath their feet, compressed into the foundations, are the bones and dreams of 20,000 workers whose names we'll never know. The marble gleams white in the sun, bleached clean of the blood that built it. The Taj Mahal is beautiful. That's not a lie. The lie is pretending that beauty came without a price, that love conquered all, that the monument means what we want it to mean rather than what it cost. The lie is looking at those perfect white walls and not seeing the ghosts. The lie is calling it a monument to love when it's really a monument to what humans will endure to build someone else's dreams. But the biggest lie? That it's all in the past. That we don't still build our beauty on others' bones. That we've evolved beyond trading lives for lifestyle. The Taj Mahal isn't just history, it's prophecy, showing us who we are when we value things over people, beauty over justice, monuments over humanity. Next time you see a photo of the Taj Mahal, maybe you'll see it differently. Maybe you'll see past the marble to the men who cut it. Maybe you'll hear past the tour guide to the screams. Maybe you'll think past the love story to the horror story. Or maybe you won't. Maybe you'll just see a pretty building and a romantic tale. After all, that's so much easier than seeing the truth. And humans, we're nothing if not experts at choosing the easy lie over the difficult truth. The Taj Mahal stands eternal, beautiful, and built on bones, just like everything else. So here we are at the end of our journey through the nightmarish reality of building the Taj Mahal. You've trudged through the mud of the workers' camp, felt the marble dust coating your lungs, tasted the gruel that barely qualified as food, and witnessed death in more creative forms than a Game of Thrones season finale. The question now is, was it worth it? For Shah Jahan, absolutely. He got his monument to love, his architectural poetry, his guarantee of historical immortality. Every year, millions visit his wife's tomb and sigh at the romance of it all. Mission accomplished. His grief has been transformed into tourist dollars and UNESCO recognition. His love story gets retold in 1,000 languages, while the hate story of its construction gets buried deeper than the workers who built it. For the workers, well, they got to participate in building one of the world's wonders, which is nice if you ignore the dying part. They got work experience that qualified them for more grinding poverty. They got exposure to innovative construction techniques and also tuberculosis. They got to be part of history. Specifically, the part history prefers to forget. The Taj Mahal stands as proof that humans can create transcendent beauty. It also stands as proof that we're willing to create that beauty through transcendent suffering. It's a monument to love built on a foundation of hate, the hatred of poverty, of exploitation, of treating human lives as disposable resources. 20,000 workers, 22 years, countless deaths, immeasurable suffering, all to build a tomb for one woman who was already dead. The mathematics of human misery don't care about architectural beauty. They don't care about eternal love. They just add up, life after life, death after death, until the numbers become too big to comprehend and too easy to ignore. But perhaps the most disturbing part isn't the historical horror. It's how familiar it all feels. Replace marble with microchips and you have modern electronics factories. Replace the Taj with fast fashion and you have sweatshops. Replace Shah Jahan with any billionaire and you have, well, the same story with better PR. We haven't stopped building our paradises on the backs of others. We've just gotten better at hiding the bodies. The suffering has been outsourced, the exploitation exported, the horror hidden behind supply chains so complex that we can claim ignorance while benefiting from the brutality. The Taj Mahal is beautiful. Undeniably, achingly beautiful. It catches the light like captured moonbeams. It makes people cry with its perfection. It's a testament to human capability, to what we can achieve when we dedicate ourselves to creating something extraordinary. But it's also a testament to human cruelty, to what we're willing to inflict on others to achieve our dreams. Every perfectly placed stone represents a life worn down, Every delicate inlay represents fingers worked to the bone. Every architectural marvel represents a human tragedy. The Taj is simultaneously humanity at its best and worst. Our highest aspirations built on our lowest actions. So what do we do with this knowledge? Do we stop visiting the Taj? Do we tear it down? Do we append a massive disclaimer to every photo? Warning, this beauty contains suffering. Viewer discretion advised. Maybe we just need to see it honestly, to look at the Taj Mahal and see both the beauty and the brutality, to admire the architecture while acknowledging the human cost, to tell the love story without erasing the horror story, to remember that every wonder of the world was built by people who probably died wondering why. The workers who built the Taj Mahal didn't get to see the finished product. They didn't get to walk through its gardens or marvel at its symmetry. They got poverty, disease, and early death. They got to be forgotten footnotes in someone else's love story. They got to build paradise and be barred from entering it. But they built it anyway. Through suffering that would break most of us, through conditions that belonged in hell, through years that stole their health and hope, they built something beautiful. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Not for love, but for survival. Not for glory, but for grain. And maybe that's the real monument they left behind. Not the marble and the minarets, but the reminder that humans can endure the unendurable. That we can create beauty even while being destroyed. That we can build someone else's dreams while our own turn to dust. The Taj Mahal will stand for centuries more, long after this essay is forgotten, long after everyone reading this is gone. Tourists will still come, still gasp, still take their selfies. The marble will still gleam in the moonlight. The gardens will still bloom. The fountains will still flow. And underneath it all, in the foundations where no tourist looks, in the dust that no wind disturbs, the ghosts of 20,000 workers will still be waiting. Not for recognition, it's far too late for that. Not for justice, that ship sailed with their lives. But maybe just for someone to remember that paradise has a price, and it's always paid by someone else. The Taj Mahal, proof that humans can build heaven on earth, as long as we're willing to put someone else through hell to do it. Sweet dreams, and try not to think about what suffering built your smartphone. That's tomorrow's nightmare.